This special report brought to you by NASA.
Three, two, one, go!
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for that applause, and welcome to NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C. We are live inside the Webb Auditorium to celebrate the NASA worm, one of the world's most iconic symbols. You can see it here behind me. It is a sleek, simple design, NASA styled in a bold, unique type. It first debuted in 1976 and then was retired in 1992, but now it is back supporting NASA's main insignia, commonly referred to as the meatball. Today, we will hear opening remarks from NASA communications experts, followed by a panel discussion, and one of those panelists is actually the designer and creator of the worm. We will learn the history of its creation, why it went away for almost 30 years, and why it's back, and also why our agency and the public love it. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Mark Etkind to the stage, the Associate Administrator of NASA's Office of Communications.
Thanks, Megan, and thanks all for joining us today. It's not often that I get to undress in public, so just indulge me for a brief moment. Yeah, there you go. Yes, thank you. This NASA logo is a beacon that shines across the globe as a celebration of human achievement. And it's safe to say that the worm is one of the most powerful insignias in the world, representing ingenuity, exploration, possibilities, and the best of what America can accomplish. The NASA worm was born of the Federal Design and Improvement Program and designed by Richard Daney. Thank you, Richard, for joining us today. It was introduced in 1976 and retired in 1992. But at NASA, we don't let great things go to waste. So we brought it back in 2020 to live aside the primary logo, the meatball. Since its historic launch, the worm logo type has resurfaced on signage, spacecraft, spacesuits, shirts worldwide. A NASA worm sculpture sits outside our brand new Earth Information Center at headquarters. The worm marked the return of the American human spaceflight on American rockets from American soil. The worm helped us usher in Artemis 1 and will be with us as we return to the moon. At NASA, we're constantly telling the stories of human achievement because when we do that, we inspire the next generation of innovators and explorers, the Artemis generation. And whenever the Artemis generation sees the worm, they will be reminded that the missions of tomorrow will be sparked by their accomplishments today. Thank you, Richard, for this remarkable symbol.
Thank you, Mark. As he said, the worm officially wriggled itself out of retirement starting in 2020. And the lead designer behind that reintroduction was David Rager. He's also here today, and let's invite him up to the stage. He's NASA's creative director.
Thank you. I'm David Rager. I'm NASA's creative director, and as design lead across the agency, I help develop and manage NASA's brand. I'm fortunate to be part of the team that brought back the 1976 NASA logo type, working with its creator, Richard Daney. And before I share a few words about that, there are two words for any of you guys tuning in home right now, that you're going to hear a lot today, and they are worm, and that's what we affectionately call the NASA logo type. And this is the NASA insignia, also known as the meatball. And the meatball was created in 1959 after NACA became NASA, and its legacy was solidified through our early and remarkable accomplishments, including the Apollo missions. And on January 1st, 1976, NASA adopted the worm as its primary identifier. Designed by Richard Daney and Bruce Blackburn, a continuously flowing line conveyed a sense of modernity, progress, and propulsion. And it was supported by a new graphic standards manual, essentially a how-to book for the brand. And their new design program was well documented, accessible, and provided endless examples of the new logo in use. And importantly, they partnered with internal creative staff like Bob Shulman to help turn an idea into reality together. course, redesigning anything with so much emotional resonance can be tricky, and there certainly were some camps, meatball fans and worm lovers. And in 1992, the NASA logo type was retired and the insignia was reinstated as our official logo. Almost 30 years later, the worm got a second life on the Demo 2 mission, and from there, we looked to see how these two incredible logos could coexist harmoniously. Aesthetically, some might say they come from different planets, but we found with just the right balance, they complement each other fantastically. And on aircraft, we placed the meatball near the crew, towards the front of the craft. And the worm rests on a larger surface for support and legibility. And on our space launch system, the insignia is placed up near the crew and the worm large and bold on the boosters. And of course, on transportation vehicles on the pad, the supersized worm became the Python. We also updated our graphic standards manual to align everything and have been gradually implementing it over the past few years. And that can be seen on places like our buildings and our spacecraft. This is a selfie that Orion took on its recent trip around the moon with all of us photobombing in the background. And we've begun to roll it out on our broadcast packages. The rigorous practice of design documentation continues to be a priority at NASA today. And here's a look behind the scenes at our New Horizon design system. And some examples of it in use on our new website, which is at nasa.gov. Of course, beyond our walls, the public has been incredibly receptive and supportive. Our merchandising office receives hundreds of requests every week, underscoring NASA's enduring influence. You know, and both these marks have made an impact, and they really show how NASA endures as a symbol of something that's larger than us all. I'm certainly thankful for the foresight that NASA had 5 decades ago to collaborate with such a thoughtful and talented designer to help us shape that symbol. Thank you so much, Richard.
Yes, thank you, Richard, and also thank you, David. It was really interesting to hear the thought behind the placement and the usage of our beloved worm again. Now it's time for our panel, so we'd like to start welcoming our guests up to the stage now. Moderating today will be Shelley Tan, graphics reporter at the Washington Post, and joining her on stage will be Richard Daney, designer and creator of the NASA worm. We also have Michael Barut, designer at Pentagram. Bert Ulrich, entertainment and branding liaison here at NASA, and Julia Heiser, artist merchandise at Amazon Music. Thank you all for being here, and we look forward to your discussion.
Thank you, Megan, for that lovely introduction. Like she said earlier, my name is Shelley Tan. I'll be your moderator today. Our panel today is going to talk a bit about the start and evolution of the worm, its impact on the design world, as well as its diffusion into the popular imagination and popular culture. So without further ado, let's kind of set the stage for how the start of this whole story goes, right? It's 1974. President Nixon and the NEA, the National Endowment for the Arts, have kickstarted a federal program to basically revamp the design identities of 40-plus federal agencies. And this is where you, Richard, you and Bruce Blackburn at the time received this request to submit a redesign proposal for NASA. Walk us through how this all starts and your thought process as everything evolves.
Well, it kind of starts with a huge shock and surprise. And we received an RFP. Our firm was about a year old. And Bruce, may he rest in peace, was very involved in federal things before it. Chamath and Geismar, where he's a partner. So he had designed the American bicentennial symbol, and we think that's one of the reasons that we got invited. Firm of 5 people, really tiny. And all of a sudden, this RFP drops out of nowhere, and we're thrilled. And we have about a week to respond, and it's ironically, it's a verbal proposal. You know, there are no visuals or anything to go with it. It's just a written proposal, and it's submitted about a week later, and then maybe they took another 2 weeks or something like that, and then they dropped a bomb on us. So we were selected to do it. Stunned and thrilled, as Michael's been through this before with me, and I'm so grateful he's sitting here today. And anyway, so we have about a month or two to pull the whole thing together. I think one of the most interesting things about it, I was talking to some friends from Pentagram earlier, we decided to propose one symbol, only one, and support it with about 25 demonstrations. Now, that was radical then, and it's radical now. But we did it, and it worked. It was approved in about a week by the same people that were in the room the day we presented it on the slide projector. And then that all happened in July, and by October, we had approval. Everybody argues about when it came to market, so to speak. It was actually 75, not 76. But the manual itself, which was a really neat document, has January 1st, 1976 in it. And that's when Dr. Fletcher wrote the endorsement letter in it. And I think that probably is the reason for that. But we had run workshops at NASA in the summer of 75. And we recommended hiring a graphics coordinator at that time, and they ended up picking Bob Schulman. Enlightened Management didn't show him the manual. He didn't see the logo, but he was hired. And he turned out to be a great ally and a very close friend. So I was able to have a 10-year relationship with NASA as a design director, external design director. Very, very rewarding. Tougher hill to climb than you might think. Mostly because the centers had just been pulled together in terms of NASA, and they were very renegade. And I likened them to unruly children. I'm sure the representatives here today, and their names are back here, but today some of that still exists. What it is, they're just very competitive. They're extremely good at what they do. But they're aggressive and competitive is one of the reasons they are good. And that made it a difficult client situation. But we got through it, and but 8 or 10 years later, we finished the last supplement in the manual, and that was one of the most rewarding involvements in my career, for sure.
Now, you mentioned the standards manual that you created as well. And it seems like that was a really important part of educating kind of people at NASA, this federal agency that maybe hadn't had much experience from this respect before. Can you talk a little bit about creating that design culture at NASA?
It was a fairly slow process, mostly because they were so independent, which is really an asset, I think, and makes them better. But there was resistance, understandably, I think, to anything coming out of headquarters. And so, ironically, I think the designers of this program got to be the liaison with the centers. I mean, in other words, we were sort of sent out there to take the heat and experience any negative stuff that might be coming out. But then we would make the point that it's all for the greater good, and that because we were bringing all of them into one matrix, the national matrix, but one core center, and that would be headquarters. So we had to make that connection. It was done in I think, a rather gentle way, and there were some rough moments. But we finally got together, and everybody was interested in success, and everybody's interested in funding, and the like. So the case was made, and pretty soon the graphics themselves started showing up in public. And I think, in a way, the public became much more enamored of it, and that influenced the employees of NASA. Because Walter Cronkite was a great name in news in those days, and he loved it, and the logo was behind his head, and it was just, it took off. And as the public absorbed it and became very proud of it, I think, then the NASA employees saw some benefit to that, so it finally stuck.
So speaking kind of the public response as well as the design world response then, Michael, you yourself have a very long and storied career in design as well as a relationship with Richard. Can you speak a bit towards how the worm might have resonated with the design world? How was it received?
Shelley, when Richard's symbol was unveiled, I was a first-year student in design school at the University of Cincinnati, which is Richard's late partner's Bruce Blackburn's alma mater. So this idea of Daney and Blackburn having created such a significant symbol was a point of school pride for my program. So we were extra aware of it. But I would also say that design students in those days felt that they were enlisting in this great cause, which was to modernize the world, to kind of blow the dust off the way it existed before, and to kind of take it forward into an optimistic, second half of the 20th and indeed in the 21st century. And this symbol was a beautiful demonstration of what that might look like. And so I would say from the minute I saw it, I understood all those things that it was meant to represent. Even things that, like, I think, like a normal person like my mom, who was a housewife, might say, well, why aren't there lines, horizontal lines making those A's? And I would have said, well, Mom, that's supposed to look like the nose cone of a rocket ship, you know? It's modern. It's like one sleek path, right? And it also, in retrospect, I realized that it has this amazing other characteristic, which is that, to put it very simply, a 4-year-old can draw it. And if you're talking about seizing the imagination of the next generation, the generation after that, that sort of capacity to sort of inculcate them in the excitement and to reduce it to a simple shape like that is just really thrilling. I'm not surprised that someone like news people liked it because it's just so visible and dramatic. In my business, sometimes we'll do some design and say, this is great, you'll be able to see it from a million miles away. You don't have to see many logos from a million miles away. You have to see this logo from a million miles away. And so, it just seemed like a unmitigated triumph to me at the time. And I wasn't all surprised at the way it seized people's imagination.
Yeah, and then to talk a little bit more about that standards manual as well then, of course it had that really massive Kickstarter campaign a couple years ago, raised almost $1 million, I believe, to reissue a physical copy of it. It feels like it's pretty fair to say it's kind of a cherished icon in the design community. Yeah. Can both of you, Richard and Michael, can you talk a bit about why you think that graphic system is still, kind of an icon today?
With some hearing issues, I think I know why it's sustained today.
Well, why the system itself is so compelling. Why is the manual compelling to people who may not even know about graphic design?
Well, I don't know. It struck a chord that I think is fairly singular. The manual was, Hamish is here today, and I got to give him credit. Hamish and Jesse reissued our manual a few years ago, and it was an enormous success. I think partly the way it's written in fairly simple, straightforward language, but it's become a cult thing, yeah. With a huge following. And the graphics were so thorough. It had a lot of teaching in it, Design 101, it's everything. But then we had a lot of wonderful finished products, rockets and space shuttles and the Hubble telescope. It's sexy and exciting for people. In that time, it was, but it still is today. Why aren't people excited about manned spaceflight? Look at the missions coming up. I mean, everybody, it's just revved up again. And, I think we're so proud that the SpaceX got involved, and Administrator Bridenstine, who he said he grew up with this was his NASA, it just, when they reintroduced it, then it invigorated everything again. But I would say that through all of this, even when it was rescinded, it only got more popular. So I think I said this to Michael once, maybe when you take it away, it gets more valuable. It seems that's the way it happened. Yeah. So the point is, and we'll be looking at this big shiny object out here a little later. But I think that's what's happened. You know, it's more popular today in the world than it was back then. And it's hard to explain, I think, but it's what it is. So there's something at the core of the whole thing. And the fact that it was serious but inspirational in a way. It's hard to do with very simple things, but that's the way I've lived my life and career, with simplicity. So it works.
Michael, did you have any additional thoughts on that? Or?
I just was going to say, when Hamish Smythe and Jesse Reed, who were two young colleagues of mine, kind of came forward with this idea, we want to reprint the standards manual. I think the appeal of it is it's sort of making public this secret source code. And people are just fascinated by that. You know, that underlying something that looks like this compelling system are people making these decisions one by one that are all adding up to something that's more than the sum of the parts. And I think the same appeal if you watch a video of someone breaking down a music track and saying, this is the drums, this is the bass, this is the vocal. You know, when you hear it all come together, it makes it even more magic in a way. And I think, you know, there was a time where you just turned on the radio, you heard a song, you just went out and you saw a logo and you just accepted it as important people were making these things, and how it happened was gonna forever be a mystery. Now I think people are able to drag and drop and pick a typeface when they start to open a Word document. And so the idea that something is specified to the degree that this whole system ends up being compelling and becomes a fetish object for not just designers, but I think people who care about space travel, people who care about engineering. A lot of different people ended up being interested in what that manual was and wanted to have a copy of it for themselves.
Now, of course, part of the journey of the worm is that moment in the 90s where it was temporarily disbanded. Bert, you were actually at NASA when this happened.
Yes, so Robert Schulman, who was running the graphics program then, he came running out of his office one morning and basically said, "Oh my God, they're getting rid of the worm." And so he said, "I have to tell Richard, I don't know how I'm going to do this." And, you know, leaderships change, and I think NASA's a very passionate place. And I think the meatball was very emblematic of the Apollo generation, I think, and also bringing people to the moon. And I associate also the worm with the shuttle era as well. And these are just different passions that come from different generations. The beauty of whether it went away and it came back is that now I feel like it's emblematic of, it's timeless, basically. It's not emblematic of a generation. Basically, both the worm and the meatball have a place. I think there might have been a little bit of a mistake to completely eradicate one over the other. There was a wonderful sort of subversive sort of cultural movement that was fomenting. I think when you guys were talking about Hamish's wonderful manual reissue, but also we had Tom Sachs was doing artwork. There were all sorts of things happening. Fashion houses started coming to us wanting to use the worm. And in sort of like 2017, Coach first came to us. And they said, we would like to do a collection with the worm. So I said, okay, I'll check with our legal office. I have the funniest feeling they're going to say no. But I went and I said, look, they're trying to do this sort of in a vintage way. And all of a sudden, the tables basically, I mean, everything sort of opened up. And they said, you can use it sort of in a vintage sort of way. So then it started sort of proliferating into pop culture, into fashion as well. Heron Preston was one fashion designer that also put the worm on the map, and you ended up seeing Ariana Grande wearing it on red carpets. BTS wore his clothing, and it just sort of filtered into the popular culture in a way which was really astounding. So both logos really speak to people. I just think given the passions and leadership changes and people want to put their own, mark on their era of leadership, things just happen, but you kind of go along with it. But what's nice about both of these logos is that they're really imprinted in the imaginations of NASA employees, the workforce, and also the public.
Yeah, so I definitely want to talk about NASA's proliferation into pop culture as well. And Julia, you work a lot with merchandising collaborations with NASA as well. Can you talk a bit about why NASA seems to be such an attractive option for this? Because especially, it's a non-product, if you will, compared to a lot of other brands or logos that we might be wearing.
Yeah, I think space exploration has long been a topic of conversation in the entertainment world, from big blockbuster movies to the Pink Floyds and David Bowies of the world. In the past 5 to 10 years, I think becoming a space nerd is really cool. And the more we have learned about what's out there, the more it's become a really big topic for artists to write songs or even whole albums about, from the Ariana Grandes to the Kid Cudis, the Doja Cats and the Dua Lipas. And it's a very dream and whimsical, galactic, interstellar theme. And artists hold a big place in being able to share that and their appreciation for it, this world bigger than them. And it ties really well with their music, looking at artists that are sitting on a planet where there's not a lot that's bigger than them. So I think it's become a very whimsical, dream big philosophy. And there probably is not a day that goes by where I do not have an artist who is wanting to collaborate with NASA, whether in their music, in their exploration, or in their merchandise.
And you've done amazing collaborations with us.
A lot.
Yeah.
It's also my personal bias, and love for the NASA logo. So every time an artist has said, here's a name of a song or here's something I want to think about, we try to work together to make sure that when we are doing a collaboration, it's rooted in either educating around a mission, bringing, insight into something bigger as far as what we're trying to get people to be inspired in space travel and space education. So we always want to make sure that there's a purpose. I think one of my favorite collaborations we have done was for the landing of the Perseverance rover on Mars. We worked to have my artist Dominic Harrison Youngblood, his cover of David Bowie's Life on Mars live stream over NASA TV when we landed the rover. It was one of the best days of my life. And then we launched a merch collaboration, and we actually licensed all of the logos. We had some meatball logo designs, some NASA worm logo designs, the Perseverance patch. But it was such a great picture and full circle moment. And for Youngblood, as he's talking to more of the entertainment worthy billboards and music charting sides of the business, it was really about him and his passion for outer space and what's out there. And I think that at its heart feels very authentic to the youth of America too. And especially when it's a logo that has so much meaning behind it, they're very proud to be able to say I have earned that right to that logo.
Yeah, it's amazing. Even like someone like Kid Cudi, who did probably 40 or 50 pieces of merch
For his Man
with
on the
us,
Moon
for his
album.
Man on the Moon album.
Yeah.
It sort of brings the message. It's really wonderful for NASA because we're able to express our message of going back to the moon in really fun, interesting ways. And they incorporate the elegance of the worm or the more wowee factor of the meatball in really, really wonderful ways. So.
Well, and besides the dream of it, it's one of the most aesthetically pleasing, symmetrical logos there is. And so for an artist to share their space on a garment or in a design, it's probably one of the most coveted ones. I get asked every day, can I put that NASA logo down the sleeve? So it's fun, and
Yeah,
it's
I
been
remember
great.
when we got the call, Bettina Inclon called me. She's here in the audience today. She called me to call Richard to tell him that they wanted to bring the worm back. And I'm like, are you kidding? I was like, holy, well, I won't say it here. I won't use an expletive. But anyway, it was such a wonderful moment to be able to call Richard one very late one evening, I think, and told you that the worm was going to come back in some sort of shape or form. To be determined by, thank goodness, to you and to David and Yvette Smith and Dan Goods and others to help bring it back, which was really amazing.
A great experience, by the way.
Yeah.
It was so wonderful. What can you say?
What was that
But Ian's here
experience
today,
like?
I think, I hope.
Yeah, so how did that feel when you got that call?
Well,
Did you feel
frankly,
vindicated?
More like stunned, but thrilling. It's thrilling to be in purgatory for 29 years with I can't say very little reason. I can't say that, can I? But to be welcomed back by SpaceX as a medium, and with so much success. I mean, that particular trip where they brought it back on the rocket was just, of course, personally rewarding. But I mean, I think it was good for the agency, and we always think of them first. You know, I would like to clarify here. You know, the firm of Daney and Blackburn did this. And even though it was tiny at the time, my partner Bruce Blackburn was very important to the front end. So it's nice to hear you call me the creator, and I was the design director through the whole 10-year period. But I want to give credit where credit is due too. And I think that that's very important. It always has been. Human relations are everything. And I think our design profession is just superior at that. Michael is a great example of it. And what we have here today then is this generational thing where, you know, Hamish calls him his design father, I'm the design grandfather. That's true. I mean, he'll back it up. I don't know where he is here, but those are his very words. But anyway, so I think, you know, this phone call from Bettina was like, the heavens opened.
Oh.
You know, it's just a new lease on life. Kind of a word was used earlier, vindication. You know, that sounds negative, and I don't like that. But it's rewarding. I can't even in words express how rewarding it's been for this to come back. There's always be a special place in my heart for NASA. I mean, it's the place I used to come, you know, like every other week for years. And so it's my second home. And, you know, so all of this, the phone call, the resurgence, the rebirth, the celebrations that have come with it today, it's just in your dreams. It doesn't get better than that.
Yeah, and also the stars sort of aligned also with David Rager being brought on board, first up from JPL. So we were able to really have a really thoughtful way of bringing the worm back so that it didn't compete with the meatball. I think that was the problem because we wanted to keep the primary logo being the meatball because that was how it's sort of officially designated, but at the same time, and use that as sort of like a seal and an imprint, but then have the worm basically describe in a much bigger, bolder way what the mission is about. And it does that really beautiful, whether it be on the Artemis rocket, on the Orion spacecraft, as we saw before, or basically on a coffee mug. So
Bert and Michael would make good agents. I'm thinking, trying to hire them, you know, later.
Yeah, and what was some of the reaction from the public as well when the logo was brought back? Whether from the design world, from the rest of NASA, what was some of that reaction like?
So I saw it for sure in social media. We have an amazing social media group, and that's part of the reason we are so popular today is thanks to social media. I think because the visuals of social media really are a wonderful way to express visually what NASA is about. And of course, our logos are very much part of that. The other thing is the fashion world, quite frankly. I mean, Balenciaga started using our logos on merch collections. We had, or fashion collections, I should say. And Dior just recently did something with us. We get, I mean, but then at the same time, we're like in Walmarts, we're in Targets. We don't discriminate. And we just basically, our logos are a public good for the public to be able to use in an approval sense. We don't license our logo, we don't charge for it, but we approve it's used to make sure that it's hopefully being used correctly. So,
yeah, I think to some artists and you want to follow the rules correctly where the logo is used as it's meant to be used. It doesn't always come to fruition. We probably have as many collaborations that never saw the day of light as we do ones that came through. I think it's such an honor to be able to achieve it. And so as long as we continue thinking about it in a way that is supporting the mission of NASA and space exploration, it's really interesting. I think that you will see a massive resurgence with this. I mean, I remember the day you called me before the Perseverance launch, and you're like, the worm's back. We can put it on logo, you know. And so I have a pair of socks today that are hot pink with the worm logo up it. I mean, it was a great experience. I think oftentimes too, from the artist world, they always want what they can't have. So knowing that there is an element of elitism to this logo and to be able to proudly be able to sport it. It's fantastic. I love that you're rethinking how these licenses can be used and to continue to spread in the right way. The logo, the NASA brand and logos, I think it's important. I grew up in the era of space exploration. I think it's a fascinating thing for the youth of America to be fascinated by, and there's no greater way to reach them right now than through apparel, streetwear, fashion, etc.
Yeah, in our we have a new merchandise person on board, Amy Crane, and she's actually thinking in really, really bold ways to try to really sort of refashion it also visually so that we can sort of ensure that the logo's being used correctly as well. So, yeah.
Nice.
So we're trying.
Very nice.
And
Amy's here.
Oh, pardon me. Julia, you also mentioned kind of when you use the logo wanting to support the mission of NASA. Can you tell me a bit more about that and how you go about doing that?
I think it's important we're not just driving monetary gain or music charting gain for the artist. The logo should not just be put on a product that has nothing to do what the music was about or what the mission was about behind the music. It's not just to financially gain. So if we start with what is the right song, music, title, track, tour that is leading to this. And then you have artists like Ariana Grande who literally write a song called NASA. And then we look at the design and see how does it fit in with what we're trying to accomplish. So it doesn't feel just hodgepodge slapped together with an artist logo or song lyrics, that the meaning of the lyrics actually, whether it be ethereal or subjective, kind of are thinking about the bigger picture and exploring something outside of us. And then I put those ideas together and pitch it to Bert and see what he thinks. And oftentimes, we're just very mindful about following all the rules, making sure that we're putting logos in placements in this brand guide. I want to read the whole thing now, the manual. But I think that's important. I think as designers and graphic designers ourselves, we love rules. Rules help us know how things are going to print and reflect in their final product. So, and it is public information. So it's something that you have an opportunity to be able to look at and see and present yourself. So I think
the thing that's so interesting, I think, about it is that, Julia, you know well the world of both branded merchandise and artists and designers using kind of those brands to sort of manipulate the codes of the commercial world in a way, right? We can't go out and buy a NASA. You can't buy NASA on the shelves of a grocery store. You can't go in a department store and say, "Show me your NASA." I mean, it belongs to all of us because it's as a federal project. It's funded and owned by the American people, really. Yeah. And what I think makes it compelling in the ways that Bert and Julie are describing to the public is the fact that this is a way to kind of show that you are kind of part of that great mission, which is kind of remarkably nonpartisan, remarkably sort of something that's perceived as something that belongs to the nation in a way. So I think it's really, that kind of, the status of that sort of entity just deserves a symbol that people can really resonate with, and that's the gift that Richard and his firm gave us so long ago that we still are enjoying and growing with every day.
Yeah, that's also a great jumping off point then to kind of go back a little bit again to that federal program that really kickstarted all of this. And it feels like that was a really important moment in at least American design history where the federal government is definitively saying, hey, good design matters, and we want to be aligned with that. How did that come about? Like, what was your experience like with that from a federal level?
Well, it's one of the great lessons, I think, that we can all learn from. In other words, it takes one person, and in this case it was Nancy Hanks who led NEA, and she instituted the Federal Graphics Improvement Program. So one person. And she was very passionate, she was very smart. And then one of her subordinates was Jerry Perlmutter, who was the best drum beater I think I've ever met. And so she put him on the assignment, and they decided that as was appropriate, that we were way behind Europe and other people in design for federal agencies. And let's do something about it. It was very rich terrain to be cultivating. And so they just put wheels under the whole thing. They started doing evaluations of the agencies, audits, and most of it was just terrible, you know. Let's say garbage. And, you know, but then they put a structure to the whole thing, you know, and they would talk to the leadership of the agency, and then they would convince them that they needed to do stage one, would just be exploratory design. Did they need help? And of course they all did. But her message was so clear and strong that all the agencies kind of fell in line. And the interesting thing about NASA was they thought if they could get a win with NASA, probably the others would fall into line and do it, because they were very hesitant, you know, there was a lot of reluctance. And it was true, and so we did start the NASA thing, and we got an early win, and it was like dominoes. And so here was this virgin territory where so much work needed to be done. And as I mentioned before, or I don't know that I specified it, but it led us to do the Department of Transportation, which was a humongous job, you know, just enormous. And then out of that, FAA, Federal Aviation, and then finally U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And this is, my hair turned gray in that period, and it fell out. But the reality is there was this great need, and I think there was a momentum. The most elegant part of this whole thing that was started by one person, a woman, and you know, it was a powerful thing, incredible program. It was very, very difficult. I have to say it was the most difficult clientele on Earth. And yet we made this progress. Lots of other firms, Tremarvin Geismar was very important to this thing, Lippincott Margulies, Pentagram. There were others involved, and incrementally, as I say, they invited more and more firms into it. It really had a power, quite an engine behind it. And so in a relatively short period of time, let's say 10 years, most of those agencies you refer to had started or completed a program.
And what was interesting about Nancy Hanks, who was head of the National Endowment for the Arts, was that she sort of had this two-track argument that she seemed to advance on behalf of this program, on behalf of the Federal Design Improvement Program. One was sort of aesthetic, which you'd expect because, you know, she was head of the NEA and cared about art and beautifying things, quote unquote, right? But the real argument that stuck had to do with efficiency and modernization. I think there was a sense that the federal government was living in the past, that, you know, people hammering away at manual typewriters, and everything was just sort of, you know, like not even like post World War II, but sort of like somehow lodged at the early part of the 20th century. And somehow, if things can be modern, so they look like real corporations, the corporations that were getting contracts from people like NASA, that would kind of advance the credibility of these federal organizations.
That's really
too.
Important.
Yeah, and she enlisted so many people, up to and including the then President of the United States, Richard Nixon, to put his signature against a mandate that had multi-step things about how the federal government would improve its design efforts, right? So, you know, obviously Richard Nixon has a mixed legacy historically, but when you read the his statements on behalf of the value of design to not just efficiency, not just beauty, but to serving the daily needs of human beings and citizens in this country, it's really, really compelling and would stand today if it was republished.
And also, Richard actually won the Presidential Design Award and was bestowed to him by President Reagan in 1985, right? And he, along with I.M. Pei, I mean, it was a big deal to have that accolade, and also sort of, it firmed up the belief that the worm really had entered into something really extra special in the visual vernacular of NASA and the world.
Glad he brought that up.
Of course. Why not?
If this is a big day, that was a big day.
I bet it was.
Yeah, I'm meeting with President Reagan, who introduced the chairman of the whole effort was IMP, as you recognize, and he introduced him as IMP. But it's okay. But it's a great day, and you think about that. And Michael's right to bring this up. Cost efficiency. Even us as designers, we use that term. So it was almost enough to turn your stomach. But efficiency, cost savings. There were examples though, like we started on civil service redesign. We didn't get past phase 1 because we started sticking our noses in the wrong places. Designers, we found out that the same job would have paper ordered from three different places, big giant paper orders, and then they would shred the 2 orders rather than send them back. Stuff like this was going on. And so our job, or even with NASA, the forms project took us 1.5 years. And we cut the form. You remember that period where you were simplifying language on insurance forms thing? That's what we were doing. And so we cut them down to about 1/3 of their size with new language and a lot less language and everything. And then the paper costs just plummeted, That's what it was. And you could lead with that ahead of aesthetics. The fact that it looked better was kind of frosting on the cake.
Yeah.
Now, Bert, can you talk a little bit about how that legacy that was created through all of this, how that has continued at NASA, what you've seen of the design culture at NASA now?
I mean, I think we're having definitely a moment right now. I think I started noticing it at NASA around the Curiosity landing, that there was this sort of new generation. I mean, I remember from the mission control for Curiosity, there was somebody that was wearing a mohawk, Bobak Ferdozi, and then somebody was like dressed up as a hippie, and there were all these people. I'm like, what's going on here? This is just too cool. And like, who are these people and where are they coming from? And all of a sudden, social media was taking off around that time. And honestly, that has done so much for the agency to be able, we have over 380 million followers or something like that in total. But it's very much a force to be able to share our story, and what a wonderful way to share it. People can just open their phones and see what's latest on NASA.gov or on NASA Social or whatever, and be able to see what's happening, what an astronaut might be taking a picture of, what Earth has, what our Earth satellites are unveiling visually, but also our logos, what they represent, and I just think that it's all about the beauty of logos, that they represent more than just an aesthetic, right? They represent the force of nature that's within us all, and then also what's in NASA and what it represents. And it also is something to aspire to, I think, on some level. It's a sort of inspirational and aspirational sort of, emblem in some ways, be it the meatball or the worm.
I think, though, to flip the script a little bit, it's not just pop culture being interested in NASA. NASA's been interested in pop culture and has really capitalized on the moment to take these moments to be part of the conversation and start a dialogue. Most of these collaborations are just the byproduct of a conversation that's happened between a blockbuster movie or an artist or a musician or a Hollywood star, because they've made a statement about their desire to go to space, or they've written a song about it, and there've been really quick responses that your social media team has been able to actually be part of the conversation. That has been a very youthful resurgence.
Yeah, and also just generally the entertainment world. I'm the entertainment liaison, and we've seen starting around 2015, 2016 with The Martian, they wanted to use the worm basically on the suits. They wanted to use the meatball in different ways. We were able to use these logos in really fun sort of fictional ways. Mm-hmm. I mean, you had even on Transformers movies, whatever. I mean, it was just really wonderful. Hidden Figures, for instance, a wonderful movie we worked on. And First Man, another movie about a biopic about Neil Armstrong. These were wonderful engagements that sort of propelled the stories of NASA forward and basically helped tell the story and the lore of the space program as it ages and sort of in a new way.
David said something David said something, but then Bert kind of echoed it a moment ago, which is, I think, the key to the whole thing, which is that people care about the NASA logo because they care about NASA, right? Like people don't. Human beings don't have an affinity to like shapes and lines and stuff. It's just those are empty symbols unless they're standing for something, symbolizing something. And in this case, what they symbolize is so powerful and so compelling. And this becomes a conduit for that passion that it engenders in people.
Yeah, and that's a lovely point as well. Can we dive a little bit deeper into that then? How do you think the visual identities here, like how do they go about representing that really incredible mission?
I mean, the meatball, I mean, if you look at the logos themselves, the meatball does it more, literally, because you have like stars and an orbit and a vector, and there's like all these sort of symbols for different elements. The worm, in a much more subtle, sort of elegant way, also sort of inhabits the world of spaceflight as well, and movement, actually, I think in a lot of ways with the S attached to the A, and you sort of have this feeling of movement, right? I mean, I know you guys are the designers, but
it's interesting. I think that David and his team orchestrated a very elegant reconciliation between these two logos, in my opinion. And I'm gonna give the meatball a little due. I'm on the record of saying, somewhere, if you Google me and this subject, you'll find me saying that the meatball is a terrible, terrible, terrible logo. And I've revised my thinking about it since then. And I think part of it has to do with the fact that if you understand the culture that it represents, it comes out of the culture of group, of esprit de corps, of a group of people that are coming together to complete a mission. And if you look up and down, particularly the world of the Air Force and the branches of the military, you find that on every level. And I think to a large degree, NASA and its predecessor agency was an outgrowth of that culture. And so the idea that insignia as a patch kind of represents an allegiance to you, your colleagues, and to the mission you're serving is really important. But I think that if you kind of look at the other side of what NASA specifically does, which is an engineering-led operation, you think back on that amazing scene in Apollo 13 where they're improvising this, they're trying to figure out how to turn the thing back on without kind of blowing the fuse. Or I'm not saying that accurately because I'm not an engineer, but like it has to do with minimal means. How can we actually achieve our goal using the least amount of power, the least amount of weight, the least amount of everything. And then you sort of like see that argues for this sort of reductive simplicity, I think. So you sort of have on one hand the meatball representing kind of the ebullience of sort of like just kind of everyone kind of coming together to kind of create something, but then sort of the idea that the thing that actually propels it forward and the world that lives in is represented, I think, by the 1975 logo. So I think and the way that they're staged on aircraft and in other things actually pays that out. You put the insignia up close to the crew, and then this thing is sort of by the engine in a way. I think it really is very elegantly balanced.
Do you know what else is really cool? The fact that we actually have something called the meatball and something called the worm. I mean, that's just crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't it crazy? I mean, it's like nuts. I mean, why is it called the meatball? I don't know. I don't know. It's just round. The worm, I understand. It's sort of descriptive.
You never called it the worm. I mean, when you
no,
and Bruce
never.
were working on it, you thought
Called
that
it
this
logo
worm
type.
thing
I
might
know you'll
just work.
find that strange, but I never call it the worm. I can say it now. It's a term of endearment now. So it used to be, it was the Fort Lauderdale paper that came up with that term, derogatory, of course. And then it became a term of endearment as meatball does. So anyway, what he just said, I didn't pay him to say that. But that's exactly what we were about in those days. And it was a flyboy culture.
Yeah.
We called it Buck Rogers then.
Yeah.
You call it, it's a space thing now.
Yeah.
So, but that's, and we were trying to take into the future, but with the simplest of means. By the way, the printing in those days was so atrocious from GPO. But when you said you're on record online, I know that's true. He speaks the truth. And, so the simplicity was obvious as propulsion and technology and all that sort of movement. But we were also trying to make it useful so that you couldn't destroy it in printing. We also wanted to put it on the front covers of everything, and on signing and on rockets. And we found the meatball was always on the back cover of the stuff that existed, as if it was embarrassing. It was partly because it couldn't be reproduced in those days. They've overcome a lot of that now, so you're okay, and there's more on the web. So that took care of itself. But Michael explained it very well that, and to reach that point in time where we needed to demonstrate that this space stuff wasn't just for jet jockeys and flyboys, but it was to getting science, this brilliant science out there down to earth, and paying your own way. That cost efficiency was still very much alive, and that's what this was about. So it was a STEM word often: NASA news, NASA activities, and of course in alphabetical light, as you noticed. So anyway, that's the kind of thing. It helps to understand, I think, the environment of that time, and it wasn't just, it was a real movement, as you addressed earlier. Why did this happen? It didn't all stick. I've been disappointed to go, but I was looking at DOT, FAA the other day, and there was the planes still designed, beautiful things. Speaking of cost saving, they were really good looking, and they still are, and it cost about a third less to paint them with our scheme that had it. Go figure.
So we're getting to the end of our time here on our panel. I would love to end with just one final quick question for Richard. Now that the worm is back, kind of what do you hope its final legacy will be as we move into the future?
To the use of the logo going forward?
What you hope it will represent in NASA going forward?
Well, I think, and this is borrowing somewhat from what we're going to say out at the 3D installation. I think it's useful for the foreseeable future, very long term. I don't see that changing. One of my design colleagues, a very noted guy, said the other day on the internet, and I'm quoting now, he said, "That logo is so damn good, it's good for another 50 years." And so my hope would be that it'll be useful for the foreseeable future, and that it can help power the great programs of NASA that are coming up.
All right, amazing. Well, thank you all so much for being here today, and thank you to our incredible panelists.
Fantastic panel. It was really interesting to hear all your individual stories and how together they tell the story of our worm from creation to its cultural significance today. So thank you again. Thank you, Richard, obviously, for creating and designing it, and also for being part of this panel, along with Michael, Bert, Julia, and Shelley for moderating. Also, thank you to David and Mark, who gave some remarks before that. So for those of you here at NASA headquarters, we invite you to continue celebrating with us. Join us outside at 12:45 for us dedicating the worm sculpture that's right outside the agency's new Earth Information Center, which just opened this summer. For those watching us on television, thank you so much for joining us. We hope this event deepens your appreciation of our worm as a symbol of NASA's history, but also our future. Have a great day.